Hi guys, everyone present, everyone correct. I was planning to do a feature on the 419 scam. However, I've got something much better to present to you today. I was actually very fortunate that Mr. Pricky, the man behind the channel Scambait Central and a key figure in the 419eater.com community, agreed to do an interview with me. I was hugely thankful that he took time out of his day so that we could do this interview, and I found it incredibly eye-opening and interesting, and I hope that you do too. I must just warn you that we did have a couple of audio problems during the interview, so I hope that doesn't detract from your enjoyment of it at all. But it's very interesting. For those of you that aren't aware, the 419 scam, also known as advanced fee fraud, is the scam where you receive an unsolicited email promising great riches, but of course you always have to make a payment up front. And Mr. Pricky is basically an expert in this. If you go and check out his channel, you'll see the videos he's made of it, so I hope you enjoy.
Okay, so I'm very happy to have Mr. Pricky with me here today of the channel Scambait Central, who does some fantastic work baiting 419 scammers. If you're not familiar with the channel, you guys really need to go and check it out. And very kindly, he has agreed to do a little interview with me today. So we're going to go through a few questions. First of all, hi, Mr. Pricky. It's great to have you with me.
Hello, IRS. Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, not at all. It's absolutely my pleasure. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go straight into the questions that I've written out and hopefully learn a bit about what you do. So obviously the very first, very easy question is, how and why did you get into scam baiting?
There's a question. It was back in 2006 and I was sat here at home and I had BBC Radio 4 on. And there was an interview with a guy from England called Mike Berry, who had just released a book called Greetings in Jesus' Name, the Scambaiter Letters. And he began to talk about the website he'd opened a couple of years previously called 419eater.com and what went on there. And I was absolutely intrigued. It was something that sounded right up my alley. I'd done similar things in the past over the past decade or so, but nothing like what he was describing. And I thought, I've got to go and have a look at this. And I registered on the site that very day, and within 3 weeks I'd managed to get myself 2 safaris, which is very unusual because usually people join and it takes some time before they can actually achieve something like that. But I was very lucky, and having done that, it sort of cemented scam baiting as a hobby. I was so pleased with what I'd achieved so quickly that I stayed with it. And yeah, I've been there 11 years now.
So for those of us not that familiar, when you say safari, what does that mean?
Sorry, should have explained. A safari is where we get a scammer to travel either 200 miles in any direction, or to cross an international border. And we do it usually on the premise that he's going to collect a load of money in some way or meet somebody who's going to give him a load of money. We trick him. We send him on a wild goose chase. It ties them up. It wastes their resources. It causes them lots of emotional stress. And it's also hugely enjoyable, where you've got a scammer almost crying down the phone at you at 2 o'clock in the morning because he's in the streets with no money, in a strange place where the locals are hostile. He's got nothing to eat. He's sold his shoes and his phone. It's absolutely one of the best feelings ever for a scam baiter.
I can totally appreciate that. And you must look at that as a huge success, especially to get 2 of them so early on in doing it.
I was very lucky. It was the same group of scammers. They travelled from London to York twice within 3 days. But anybody's thinking, wow, this guy, amazing. I didn't get my next safari for 5 years. So there you go.
Maybe a little bit of beginner's luck in that case then.
I think so.
Which kind of brings me on quite nicely to the next question. So, what is your... because you've been in this game for a lot longer than I have, and obviously you deal with like the 419 scammers, which is kind of a bit different to the things I do. But what is your favourite, or a few of your favourite baits? Which have you been most proud of?
A couple. They're both on 419 Eater in the Eaters greatest hits for him, it's called. One is My Held Safari, where this bastard loan scammer, he was a student at Ambrose Ali University in Edo State in Nigeria, and he was paying his schooling fees by robbing people. He was pretending to be a loan lender, to have money to lend. He was offering these loans at amazingly preferential rates with no security required, and people who were absolutely desperate for money to keep their homes or keep their businesses were sending him lending fees, and of course there was no money. So I got well into him and eventually persuaded him to travel from Nigeria to Ghana. He was there for a couple of days and went home. And then I got him to go to the Republic of Benin, right up to this hellhole desert Kazi called Bouaké. And hang on, not Bouaké. What's the name of that place? I'll remember it in a minute. But it's a city in the northwest of the Republic of Benin, and there's really nothing there. And they also speak French, and the English-speaking scammers really hate going to French-speaking countries, because not only can they not speak the lingo, the locals are very suspicious of them. Mm-hmm. So he slept on the streets there for 2 weeks. He was begging for money to eat. He was begging for money for the internet cafe. And he eventually managed to blag some money from a relative back home by Western Union. And he got back to Nigeria. And then we managed to persuade him to go up to Kano, which is quite a dangerous place. It's a Muslim fundamentalist stronghold, right. And they're very suspicious and hostile to strangers. And he was up there for 3 nights. He had a really bad time, and that was my first really serious safari. But I suppose my favourite one would be when I managed to persuade a scammer in Ghana to send a scammer all the way from Accra in Ghana to London in England, and then down to Cornwall and up to Rame Head, which is a promontory of rock on the Cornish coastline. Mm-hmm. And there's a centuries-old chapel on the top of it called St Michael's Chapel. And I actually got him to go there, and it cost them thousands of pounds. His boss in Ghana borrowed the money from local mafia, and because he didn't get the £234,000 he thought he was coming to collect, this was a gold scam, he had to go into hiding, and I've never heard from him since. So that was a great plus.
Well, yeah, definitely. Do you think like maybe that could cause some kind of quite serious repercussion to the scammer themselves, though?
I hope so.
Okay.
I used to feel a little bit of humanity for them, but over the years, as I've become exposed to victims, some victims have actually gone out to West Africa to meet them and have ended up being found dead on the streets of places like Lagos a few days later. Some victims have chosen to end their lives because of the misery the scammers caused them. Others have just simply lost their life savings. They've lost everything, their homes, their businesses. And in the face of all this misery and desperation that these characters have caused, I can temporarily shelve my natural feelings of humanity. And where a scammer is concerned, I wouldn't flick an eyelid if they died full of cancer screaming their heads off. These are the most despicable vermin on 2 legs, and I loathe every single inch of them. And if I can cause them harm in some way, I wouldn't hesitate to do so.
Okay, well, I can understand your point of view. I do remember quite a famous story, although it was to do with the, and it's something we'll come on to in a little while, but the romance, an Australian lady, I believe, went to Ghana to meet her lover and was never seen again, which was a very sad story. So I'll try and go back to something a little bit lighter now in that case. So when you're, because obviously these guys, they always work through email. The initial contact is nearly always email, if I'm correct. How long does your correspondence normally last, like the back and forth with them, before you manage to actually get them on the phone?
For audio, not very long. I mean, I'm baiting a few at the moment because people want me to do some calls with Mr. Babango, so I've had to go back into straight baiting to get a few scammers ready to call me. Yeah. And one of them wanted to speak with me on the phone the very day that I first replied to him. Generally, if we're setting them up for some calls, we get into them for about 2 weeks. and that establishes credibility. They believe that we're serious, that we've considered their offer, and we're actually going to arrange to draw the money from the bank and send it. Phone numbers, some of them actually don't like speaking on the phone, because in much of West Africa, getting an unregistered SIM card is very difficult. In places like Nigeria and Ghana, the SIM cards are obtainable through the government, and you have to actually show official ID, and the number is then registered to your name. Of course, there's a black market, but it's not quite as straightforward. So some of them actually don't like speaking on the phone and give fake phone numbers in their emails, assuming that we're never going to call them anyway.
Yeah, I can understand that. When I've tried to get them on the phone, I've never had any luck. So yeah, I can understand that they do that. But you guys do it very, very well, and seem make it look very easy. And speaking of kind of getting them on the phone, your videos are normally like very funny. They're in a comedic manner. When you do the emails, I mean, I have read a lot of 419 eaters, so I know that a lot of the emails are very funny, but more for the benefit of the people listening. Do you tend to play it straight so as not to perhaps lose the scammer, or do you try and keep the emails in that same kind of vein of comedy?
I play it very, very straight. Until recently, I used to mentor new baiters, and I always used to say to them, when you choose a name for your baiting character, choose an ordinary, sensible name. You might get a few laughs from uninventive baiters with names like, I don't know, How It Hurts or Ivor Biggin. But the fact is, if your bait becomes a serious one, and there's a chance of a safari or a trophy or something impressive, that's when your scammer is likely to ask for the advice and counsel of his ogre, that's his boss or his chief, or his brothers or his fellow scammers. And where you've got a group of people looking over his shoulder at your email, there's a greater chance of somebody picking up on that idiosyncrasy. So I always play it very straight with them. And I actually exercise humility when I speak with them. They like it when I call them sir.
Yeah.
They like to hear that. So I call them sir. I'm very polite, unless they really want me up.
So I guess we've kind of covered this as well when you were talking about previously, when not having any kind of not feeling any guilt about what their comeuppance may be. But have you at any point ever felt kind of guilt or sympathy or compassion for any of the scammers you've dealt with? This might be something more coming from my side. I know a lot of people, when I deal with the Indian phone scammers, for example, a lot of them talk of stories of poverty. Now, I'm not so familiar with the 419 scammers, so I don't know if they have similar stories, but have you ever felt kind of bad about what you're doing?
I've never felt any pangs of guilt in view of their perceived economic status. That's to say, I've never thought this guy is a very, very poor person and I can understand why he's scamming me. This isn't Live Aid. We're not dealing with skeletal figures draped in shawls, squatting down in arid scrub. These are fat boys with their suits and their gold watches and their smartphones. I could give you the name of the Ghana Sakawa Boys Facebook group. There are thousands of them in there. Most of their profiles are wide open. These are their real life profiles. And you can see them with their bundles of cash on their bed and their gold plated smartphones and the trash they spend their money on. They go down to the mall and they buy the most tasteless Nike trainers and shell suits you can imagine. Things that not even chavs in the UK would wear. The lowest of the low. But these are kids with sports cars and money. They may actually be living in places where they've got leaves above their head and dirt on the floors, but they have money. This isn't the third world here. These are people living in societies with infrastructure who choose to go and scam. Now, I was talking with somebody about today. His parents lived through World War II in Britain, and they were so poor they used to go to the butcher for bones for the dog. They didn't have a dog. The bones were to stew up for broth for them and their kids. They didn't turn to fraud and theft. Nothing justifies that. Compassion only once, and that was the first serious safari I had, when I had a scammer sleeping on the streets. And I just felt this pang of concern for his welfare. And I had a chat with one of the moderators on 419 ETA about it, who had a bit more experience in safaris than me. And at the end of that conversation, I felt, yeah, I can understand why I was concerned, but I no longer am, and I don't care what happens to him.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, and I think a lot of them, when they are kind of called out, well, they will, to an extent, say whatever. You know, nothing really justifies taking money from innocent people to any extent, in my opinion, and that's why I have my own kind of issues, or well, I was going to say personal vendetta. That might sound a bit strong, but that's why I dislike scammers so much as well, because they put their kind of wealth above other people's welfare and well-being. In regards, going back to talking about the 419 scammers, because that's why I was so interested to talk to you, because it's not something that I've had any experience with really. But I noticed, especially from watching your videos, they're very aggressive. Not even before you've called them out. Like the phrase listen to me" is used many times, and why do you think that is? Because to me, I would have thought if you're trying to convince someone that they're doing a business deal or you're giving them lottery money, you would be much better off trying to be polite and businesslike.
It's actually part of their culture. The Africans are very like the Arabs in that everything is about face and everything is about front. And that's why one of the most successful scambaiters I've ever known, both in terms of audio and safari, was an Arab from Kuwait, a guy called Dharma, who has been off the site for years now. And he could get his own way with the most aggressive scammer because he was equally blunt with them, and it came very naturally to him. I've been to North Africa a few times, to Morocco a couple of times, and Tunisia, and you always get wheeled into a carpet shop. And when you go in one of these carpet shops, you've got super pushy, super aggressive salespeople trying to sell you a carpet, and they know that us Westerners aren't used to it. Yeah. But if you've got an African or an Arab in your group, just with a dismissive wave of the hand, the seller is gone and onto more likely prospects. So I don't think that it's something that they're necessarily putting on. I think it's part of the culture. Right. And it can be quite successful because here in the West, we're just not quite sure how to react when somebody is that pushy with us.
Yeah, I can say so. Yeah, it's far more a cultural thing than just the style of the scammers. It's kind of a thing for the whole, just the way those countries act, I guess. You've mentioned as well, obviously, the safaris, and I believe you've also managed to bring them to come to Britain. Do you feel that you've ever put your own safety in jeopardy by doing this?
I hope so.
You hope so. You'd like to live on the edge.
Well, we've only outed ourselves to travelling scammers twice, and that was when we did a documentary for a UK channel, and we did one for a Canadian channel, and just exceptionally, because otherwise it wouldn't have made good viewing, we had to confront the scammers on camera and say, we know who you are. Yeah. But there was security stood around, although the security was to protect the camera crew, not us. No, I mean, I do get them to travel, and I have to say that 419 ETA does not condone scambaiters getting physically close to scammers because of the inherent risks. What I do, which is to be around in the area that I've sent them to, surreptitiously filming and photographing them, I do that independently as Mr. Pricky. It has nothing to do with 419 ETA, and people need to know that. Right. But do I feel? No, I mean, I'm very careful. I usually film and photograph them from a distance. If I approach them, it's only if I'm at Rame Head, where I get out of my vehicle dressed up as a walker with a rucksack and binoculars, and I try and get them to walk up the cliff to St. Michael's Chapel. All the time I'm snapping photographs ostensibly of the landscape and the sea, but it's not. It's actually of them as they puff up the 1 in 4 slope to the chapel. I can't say I have. I'm very careful, and I'm streetwise, and I assess the risks, and if I don't like the look of it, if there's half a dozen of them, they're looking very unpleasant and tough, then I might keep away. But otherwise, I'm usually there with my camera and my video camera getting some shots.
Yeah, well, I saw that documentary. It's a while ago now, but I remember it's very satisfying watching them. And I also saw, I think it was a clip quite a while ago of some guys that got some to come to Paisley, which is somewhere I'm quite familiar with. And that was very satisfying to watch the scammers turn up in the outside in the square in Paisley as well. I don't know if you were involved in that one at all.
No, that was actually before my time. That was the
Uh,
first time it'd been done, and it was our site founder, Shiver Me Timbers, the guy that I mentioned earlier, Mike Berry, that wrote the book.
yeah,
He got a scammer, a white South African guy, to travel all the way from London to Glasgow twice within a few days. And another baiter called Charlie Fake was there filming him. It was that actually inspired me. When I saw that in 2006 when I joined the site, I thought, this is what I want to do.
yeah, yeah. I mean that was because I believe it may well have been was it Charlie Six? He was he was a taxi driver, wasn't he? And he was sitting taking the photos from his taxi, if
Do you
I
know,
remember correctly.
you might know more than me. I
Uh,
can't remember.
Oh, okay. See, I loved watching all of these things. They're just so intriguing, and it was so nice to see the scammers kind of have the shoe put on the other foot, and to see the lengths that they would go to on the promise of a little money was incredible. Um, Kind of speaking about scammers traveling, talking more about like their culture and their country. Why do you think that the 419 scam is predominantly in West Africa?
Well, if going back historically, it supposedly originally started in Spain, the Spanish prisoner
Yeah.
letter, which people can search on Google. But Nigeria, being West Africa's most populous country, sadly is endemic with scams and fraud, from the top of the government down to the lowest government official. And young men see these corrupt people driving around in SUVs with blackened windows, living in compounds with high walls and razor wire, going out with their women to the clubs and living these very opulent lifestyles, and they think, why not me? So they turn to fraud. It doesn't for one moment excuse it,
No.
but I think it explains it. And Nigerians have spread throughout West Africa and taken 419 with them. And Ghana has its own homegrown variety called Sakawa, which is a form of black magic that they go through in order to firm up and solidify their scamming activities. It's a real shame. It's a shame that Nigeria, which is a nation which has a great culture, its own wealth in the form of oil, is best known for scams.
Yeah. I guess because I see a lot of them also now coming from Ghana, as you mentioned, and also Benin seems to be quite rife with it at the moment. Um, Also, I mean, it's quite a famous thing. Like you were saying, there's people back in 2006 making videos on this, and with 419 being so popular now, or maybe not popular, but well known. Do you think there's still money in it for them? I mean, why continue with this? I mean, maybe, I mean, I guess they would only continue with it if some people are still falling for it, but that's almost to an extent beyond me because it's been so well profiled now. Why do you think that they kind of, or do you think for them it's still profitable and still worth doing?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely profitable. Very much so. There are six and seven figure sums still being pulled from victims. I read recently about a firm of lawyers in the USA that had been taken for a six-figure sum by a very shrewd and clever Nigerian scam gang. In terms of publicising 419, it's the publicity is never ever going to be able to combat the prevalence of the scamming. In the same way that we scambaiters only scratch the surface and
Yeah,
we're never going to do anything to stop it, there are always going to be victims. Love dating scams is a growth area because more and more of us are living alone and turning to the internet in order to find partners, and they know that and they're exploiting it, and they're very clever and insidious and devious in what they do, so they're always going to be victims. uh, People are going to believe they've won a lottery they didn't enter simply because they're desperate for money
yeah,
and believe that it may be their good fortune. People are going to believe that a relative they didn't know they had has died in West Africa and left them millions, and they just have to pay a barrister for an affidavit to get the money because they're desperate and they need the money. A combination of desperation, tugged heartstrings, and a belief in honesty of people, I think, contribute towards people being conned, and they'll continue to be conned. I
Yeah.
have to say actually that I nearly got taken myself about 7 or 8 years ago by a very, very well put together phishing email, ostensibly from eBay, but actually come from Eastern Europe. And you know, I was that close to clicking submit with my login details there, so even I nearly got caught. So it's very easy to get caught with some of these scams.
Oh, those email ones are everywhere at the moment. But I mean, even I've got a few fakey, and they look very good. I got one this year, and it said, you've, I think it was to PayPal actually, but it then said you've made a purchase on eBay, and I thought, no, I haven't. And I was
Hmm.
just about to click on it, and then I double checked, like, you know, the little drop down to see exactly where the email had come from, and saw it didn't look right at all. And then I just went into my PayPal account and checked, and there had been no activity at all. But also there, you mentioned the love romance scams. Have you ever, or would you ever consider setting up fake profiles to bait the dating scammers, which I guess is kind of an offshoot of the 419 scam also?
I've never personally gone for love dating scammers, but some baiters on ETA specialize in it, and they have numerous fake profiles on dating sites. They have fake profiles on Facebook, fake accounts with Messenger for online chat, and they really specialize in it. They get pictures of virtually unknown actresses and
Yeah.
actors to use as their profile pictures. They play around with them in Photoshop so they can't be reverse image searched through Google, so the scammers can't find them, and they do very, very well with them. It does take quite some time if you're baiting a love dating scammer to get anything much out of them, because they're often in it for the long haul. It can be months in a real scam before they ask the victim for some money. I don't have that patience. I can't sit for hours and hours on end every night on IM chatting to them. But the love dating baiters do, and I take my hat off to them.
Yeah, it's very commendable. It's something I kind of thought about, but then, as you said, the amount of work that goes into it, I was like, it's so difficult, and you have to be so careful as well. I would never like to use a photo of, you know, that could be tracked back to someone real and get them in any kind of trouble. So I suppose it's a very difficult area. Um, Something a little bit more light-hearted, I guess. Why Mr. Pricky? Where did the name come from?
Mhm. It sort of ties into what you were just saying. We never ever involve ITPs, innocent third parties, in our baiting. So we wouldn't use a real address as our address as a character. We wouldn't use a real person's name unless it was a public figure like an actor or a politician or somebody, and they're fair game because they've set themselves up in the public eye.
Yeah.
Now, Pricky is actually a real person that I used to know back in the 80s and the 90s, and his name's Ricky.
Okay.
I put a small P in front of it to get up his nose, and it really did. It really used to piss him off that I used to call him Pricky. But he is a really disreputable, dishonest, low-life character that I really wouldn't want to meet again. And I was the only person that called him Pricky, so he could never be linked with the Pricky character that I use now. It's sort of a humorous name, but
Yes.
in the UK, anybody in the Royal Navy whose surname is Price is liable to be called Pricky.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So it actually does exist as a nickname in the UK. So if a scammer Googles it, the chances are they're not going to find me anywhere
No.
because it is used here and there. But it's sort of a humorous name. And when I get this voice coming down the phone from Lagos calling me Mr. Pricky, I do grin a bit.
Yeah. Listening to some of your calls, I hear some of the team just refer to you as Mr. Prick, and they don't pick up on it either. So when you've got like Mr. Babango or someone pretending to be the Western Union clerk, and he goes, "Yes, Mr. Prick's gone out for a cigarette," and the 419 person never seems to pick up on it. Um, And also, okay, so to go from something a bit lighthearted to something a bit more serious, and I don't really know if you would be able to explain this. I don't know if anyone can, but I guess you kind of touched on it, like the Sakawa thing. But many of these 419 scammers, they seem to be very religious. Yet, how do you think they justify, you know, stealing money and being a fraudster for a living to themselves? I mean, surely if you were a God-fearing person, that would you would be aware that what you're doing is very wrong.
Religion is a massive part of life in West Africa. They're almost all out at church or the mosque on a Sunday, which is why it's usually very hard to get hold of them on a Sunday, and they tend not to call you on Sundays. I don't know exactly how each individual religious West African scammer reconciles their nefarious activities with their religion.
Yeah.
Certainly, many of them who have been called on what they're doing will say, well, you colonial bastards, you fleeced my country of its riches, you sold my great-grandfather into slavery, and they'll bring up colonialism as an excuse.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways they justify it. They bring up this colonial argument and they play the race card. But morally and ethically, it's impossible to justify fraud with one's religion. Although, and I don't know if this is a fact, and maybe your listeners will know better than me, I did read recently that those who are involved in fundamental Islam believe that there's nothing wrong in extracting money from an infidel. And it was something I read recently, and I thought, that's interesting, and I'll look into that, and I haven't yet. So I don't know about that. And some of the scammers we do bait are Muslim. Most of them tend to be Christian. How they reconcile it, how they live with it, and how they feel they're going to be judged when they get to the pearly gates, I don't know.
No, I'm not sure about that either, but it's you kind of covered it there by justifying it with race, and that sort of brings me on to my next question, which is, especially with my scam baiting as well, where it's mostly people in Indian call centers, and especially in my comments section when I've uploaded videos, I've been accused of racism, which is something that I've never been accused of before doing this. Have you had any sort of similar issues? And like you said, like especially in fact, it's almost a parallel, because actually none of the scammers have ever really said this, but some people in the comments say, because Britain imperialized India, this is why, it's come back. But that was a different time. You and I, or anyone, was not involved in that. These people, well, in my opinion, these people are absolutely still criminals. But do you find with your channel, you have the same sort of issues with people accusing you of racism, and how do you deal with that, if you have?
Well, I'm a 419 baiter, which means I only go after the 419 as the advance fee fraud scammers. Now, since advance fee fraud emanates from West Africa, it's inevitable that most of the scammers that contact us are going to be black. They're going to be West Africans. Yeah. We don't go looking for them. No. They come looking for us with their emails. I do everything I can to negate or dispel any suggestion or inference that what I'm doing is racist by publicizing when one of the scammers turns out to be white. And for example, at the moment in my Facebook page, every week or so, I'm uploading an album of photos of a scammer or scammers that I photographed on Safari. And I'm making very sure that every 2 or 3 lots of photos, I'm uploading an album of a white scammer. And if anybody looks at the 10-second intro video that's at the start of all of my most recent uploads, there's a little train. Now, the little cutout faces in the carriage of the train in the windows are all scammers that I photographed, and there are some white ones there. To answer your question directly, I think it has happened, but I'm struggling to remember the last time anybody tried to accuse me of racism. What I have been accused of a couple of times on YouTube by the misguided is mistreating people in the third world and not showing compassion for poor West African thieves. And I just refuse to go along with that. That's just misguided bullshit. They're thieves. I don't care which society or culture they come from. They're thieves, and they've chosen to do that when they didn't have to choose to do that.
No, I'd absolutely agree with your point there. More or less, we're coming to the end, but I just wanted to kind of get some of your, because obviously you've got so much experience in this, and I listen to a lot of your videos, and you seem to know all of the kind of words that they use and the words that upset them. I mean, Mugu is, in fact, I was listening to one of your videos yesterday, and you mentioned you didn't actually have it in the video itself, but you mentioned on the whole music you played to the scammer when he thought he was speaking to Western Union was the Mugu song, which I assume is the I'm gonna chop your dollar song. So obviously, lots of people know the word Mugu, but could you just give us a quick guide through some of like the 419 scammer lingo?
I know I know a bit. I know a bit, but there are some baiters who are so fluent in African pidgin phrases that they can come out with this spontaneously. But mugu, mugu, literally means big fall, and it is only ever applied to a 419 victim. So they will talk about the mugu. They sometimes sanitize it and call us clients, which is outrageous. But now mumu is a word they will use to describe each other, and mumu just means fall. Village mumu.
Right.
Most villages, most settlements at home and abroad, I guess, have somebody who isn't particularly bright. So if they call each other a mumu. They're calling them a fool. Cafe boy, with boy spelt B-O-I, is a scammer who is so unsuccessful and so poor that he doesn't actually even have a smartphone to browse the web. He goes into the internet cafe and sits there in the sweat and the mediocrity, banging away on someone else's keyboard all day, sending his emails and bombing the world.
So that would be quite insulting, I assume.
Yeah, I like to call a scammer cafe boy. They really don't like that because they're stood there in their suit with their smartphone and their gold watch, and you're relegating them back to where they originally started from when they were in their scabby t-shirt and flip-flops.
And also, I've heard you refer to them as lads, and I don't know if this is just because obviously it's something we use in English dialect. Is that specifically a 419 scammer term, or is that just lads like we would say lads?
Lads it's actually a 419 eater phrase, and I actually have got a passionate dislike for cliches, and I try and avoid them studiously. Okay. But lad is a 419 eater cliche. And it's one that's so difficult to avoid using when you're talking about scammers. And it originally comes from the lads from Lagos. And that's so steeped in scambaiting history, I'm struggling to remember the origins of it. I can't remember if it was a book or a story or some sort of plot, but it goes back to when the site started, the lads from Lagos. And the phrase lad became the title for any scammer. So we call them lads, and we call female scammers ladettes.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's more or less everything. I don't want to take up too much of your time, Mr. Pricky, so I just want to say thanks so much for joining me. It's been really enlightening. I've very much enjoyed being able to do such sort of an open and honest interview with you. And guys that are listening, there'll be the links to the Scambait Central channel in the description, so please make sure you go and check it out. There's some incredibly funny videos there. So yeah, once again, thanks so much for joining me. And hopefully I'll get to speak to you again soon at some point.
Well, I'd like to thank you, IRS, for inviting me on and giving me some time to talk about what I do. I'm quite humbled by it. I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your channel, and I admire what you do very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, well, I'll wrap up the video there. So thanks for listening, everyone, and good night.